Manila Manila was a Filipino queer from the City of Manila in the Philippines, living in Qatar, the Persian Gulf country. Manila's first name was Manila and his last name was Manila. Manila Manila from Manila. Manila's folks immigrated to Doha in the mid-1960s because his daddy was an experienced roughneck and found a job as a day laborer at one of the many foreign-owned and operated wells in the country. While Manila's daddy, Kent, worked the wells, his mother found work as a housemaid, as many Filipinas still do to this day in Qatar and elsewhere in the region. Well, in the Middle East, foreign laborers are not only treated poorly by any standard, but generally only get short-term temporary work visas and are forced to leave country after only a few short months of what is tantamount to slave labor. Long hours and grueling work and occasional physical abuse are not unheard of. But not so with Manila's folks. They managed to find a niche for themselves in Qatar where they were treated fairly and were able to outstay their work visas by 15 years. By which time they were granted permanent residency, largely in part thanks to Gloria's, Manila's mother, employer, who was a wealthy sheik, and being fond of Gloria, was able to petition for the Manilas and push through their papers at the embassy. Well, by the time Manila was 20, he was queer than a three-eyed pink alligator and turning tricks for a healthy living. In addition to Mandarin Chinese and Spanish, Manila became fluent in Arabic and even spoke it with an authentic regional accent that even the Arabs couldn't discern. He picked up some English from bootleg VHS movies he'd buy and watch over and over again. Manila was fond of American cinema, and what he saw on the screen filled his mind with all sorts of dreams of Hollywood bullshit. As a sex worker, he'd gained a reputation amongst the Arabs as a pleasure boy who could suck a watermelon through a straw and had an asshole tight as a whiskey barrel. Of course, in the Middle East, homo-sex is expressly forbidden, but as there are many things in that part of the world, it's at the same time forbidden and contradictorily acceptable, and even outright encouraged under the right circumstances to be queer, or at least engage in queer sex. Well, due to his aforementioned talents and physical attributes, Manila became a top-dollar sex worker, and by the time he was 21, had amassed enough wealth to leave Qatar and set out for the land of his dreams, New York City. Manila had always dreamed of seeing the lights at Times Square at night and lounging on Sunday mornings on the Great Lawn in Central Park. He'd always dreamed of drinking cappuccino at a West Village cafe and witnessing the many unseen hedonistic delights of Chelsea Art Society as made famous by Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground. He'd watched every Woody Allen movie and action films like The King of New York and Death Wish, which only further romanticized the city and further perpetuated his ambitions to make it there. He dreamed of one day becoming a Broadway actor and dancer, and believed in his heart that he had the chops for it. He'd practice his moves and recite movie lines in the mirror every night before he went to bed, and he thought he had the requisite talent needed to get a part, any part. He knew success wouldn't come easy, though, and that he'd have to work for it. But what he'd do when he got there to get by didn't much matter. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Manila had just about enough money, by his estimate, to live conservatively for 3 months in New York while he tried out for parts. But being a realist, he knew he'd need a day job to get by while he got established as an actor. To get by, he thought maybe he could do some clean work, some straight work. He thought maybe as an office worker of some kind, maybe an assistant to a big-time executive who might help further his career on Broadway. Perhaps he'd end up at a filing cabinet for hours each day, filing the same beige manila folders which bore his first and last name. That'd surely be easy to do. But if he couldn't find an honest day job, he knew he could always turn tricks. He was the best, after all. He didn't much mind that one way or the other. So one day, Manila bought a ticket and packed his bags. He said goodbye to his best customers, bought himself a map of his new city, and kissed his mama and his daddy goodbye. The one thing Manila forgot to do was tell his de facto pimp, Ahmed, that he was planning to leave. Well, the night of Manila's flight, Ahmed, who was a pimp with a cruel reputation and a hot temper, got word of Manila's planned and unannounced departure through one of Manila's clients who would call in for a replacement pleasure boy. Well, I think it's safe to say that upon finding out, Ahmed wasn't none too happy about it. Manila was a commodity in Qatar, a real piece of ass. Arab queers just love fucking that boy's asshole. The way the pimp saw it, if Manila left, he'd be taking with him the greatest Oriental rent boy in Arabia and a supplementary income of $80,000 a week. Well, Ahmed wasn't about to let that happen, so he arranged to have Manila ambushed at the airport and brought back to him so he could try and reason with his bitch, to try and convince him to change his mind about his foolish dreams of moving to America. As planned, when Manila stepped out of the airport taxi, 3 of Ahmed's henchmen were there and waiting for him. They grabbed Manila and drugged him into a parked van. They roughed him up some and then drove him from the airport en route to their boss. Ahmed, who had never been walked out on by a bitch before, was furious and embarrassed about the whole endeavor. It had become a matter of honor, of dignity, and integrity. He was truly pissed off. With each passing minute, Ahmed grew angrier and had already determined that one way or the other he had to make an example of Manila to deter future recurrence. Not too long after Ahmed's men kidnapped Manila, they drug him from the van and up into Ahmed's high-rise penthouse overlooking the port of Doha. Ahmed's droogs brought Manila before him, and Ahmed asked Manila why he tried to leave, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear from the beak of the canary. Manila answered back the truth, that he'd always dreamed of living in New York City, and one day hoped to become a famous Broadway actor. This just about made Ahmed laugh hysterically. Ahmed reminded Manila that he was a career hooker, not an actor, and that their informal pact of hooker and pip, citing Manila's indefinite service agreement. He told Manila he was forbidden to leave, and that he had to get back to work at once or else. Manila would not be intimidated, though. He bit down and stood fast. He told Ahmed he would follow his dreams, and there was nothing that neither Ahmed nor his henchmen could do about it to deter him. Well, Ahmed realized right then and there that Manila was decided, and Ahmed didn't take long to react. Ahmed had resting by his side a 17th century Arabian saber that was a kind of family heirloom. It was sheathed in a solid gold scabbard that was encrusted with rubies, emeralds, and topaz, coming from a time when Ahmed's family were wealthy members of an elite nomadic society way back when. Ahmed drew the oblong sword from its sheath and gave Manila one final warning, one last chance to change his mind. A defiant soul, Manila responded with a forceful and resolute no. "Fuck you," Manila declared forcefully, in unpolished movie English and with an Arabian accent. Ahmed, who spoke English just fine, didn't even bother to respond with a comeback line. And without any hesitation at all, Ahmed flung the saber up and into Manila's groin and all the way up into his chest, splitting the 21 years old aspiring Broadway star in twink horror in two. In an instant, Manila was dead. Ahmed's men cleaned up the mess, wrapped up Manila's remains in a plastic tarp, drug him out to the shipping docks, and dumped what was left of him in the Persian Gulf, where his two halves might just could have been drawn far out and away from the Arabian Peninsula by the North Atlantic currents and into the open ocean. Those same currents might plausibly take Manila's waterlogged, floating, decomposing remains 3,000 miles west across the seas. And who knows? What was left of Manila's body after that long ocean voyage might just could have made its way all the way into the New York harbor. An almost poetic thought. So, Manila, with the family name Manila, born in the city Manila, met his end being split in half like a Manila folder. The same kind he once thought he might have filed an office day job for a high-level executive whilst he worked his way to Broadway stardom, had he made it to New York City alive.